5 minutes.
I'd like to thank Chairman Payne, Ranking Member Crawford, Chairman DeFazio, and the members of the committee for allowing me to speak on behalf of my constituents today. My name is Judge Trey Duhon, and I serve as County Judge for Waller County, Texas. Neighboring Houston, we are both suburban and rural and a minority-majority county, which creates a diverse and unique set of impacts on our citizens related to growth and infrastructure. I'm here today to provide a real-world perspective on the Texas High-Speed Rail project promoted by Texas Central Railway. I'm not opposed to high-speed rail, but if you believe high-speed rail can provide the American people with the cheaper, greener method of mass transit, please listen to me that Texas High-Speed Rail project does none of those. Since 2014, Texas Central has promised landowners and elected officials that no tax dollars would be needed for its private project, that it would only cost around $10 billion to construct, and it would be operational by 2021. Texas knew better, so it passed a law in 2017 prohibiting the use of state funds for private high-speed rail, which is still in effect today. Then, just last year, Texas Central's chairman, Drayton McClain, admitted in a letter to a Texas state senator that the project had turned into a $30 billion project, meaning costs have tripled without even putting a shovel in the ground. He also admitted that the project would not be privately financed, sharing that they were going after stimulus money to fund the project. Why the sudden change? Because over the past 7 years, Texas Central has secured only $450 million, to our knowledge, in private financing, which includes a $300 million loan from the Bank of Japan, just 1.5% of the project's $30 billion current price tag. Even if Texas Central had $30 billion, they do not have authority under Texas eminent domain law to acquire the 240 miles of private property along the proposed route, an issue that's still being litigated before the Texas Supreme Court. In addition, when the Surface Transportation Board took jurisdiction over the project 10 months ago, it made clear that Texas Central cannot begin any construction or operation unless and until it submits a full application for a construction permit, which TCR has yet to file. Assuming it ever does, this hard-look full application process will take years to complete. In the final days of the Trump administration, the Federal Railroad Administration, for the first time in its history, issued a rule of particular applicability, creating a carve-out for the Japanese high-speed rail technology TCR wants to use for the project. But again, the FRA said this does not grant authorization to construct or operate the project either. To put it bluntly, Texas Central is in no better position to build the project today than it was before the STB and the FRA rulings. Then there is the issue of feasibility. As I speak here today, not one government agency has evaluated whether the project is economically viable. In fact, during the EIS process, the FRA removed economic viability from the project's purpose altogether and proceeded with the study, feasibility absent. What's worse, Texas Central has overstated ridership while underestimating cost, a recipe for disaster. As one expert put it, quote, "Based on our experience and analysis, we are concerned that Texas Central's project will fail so spectacularly that privately financed U.S. high-speed rail lines may never be given a second chance." So I am urging you to proceed with extreme caution. Before you decide to give billions of taxpayer dollars to build this private project, consider why you should simply take this company's word that construction is around the corner and the project is financially feasible, when history has proven that their words mean nothing. What is the benefit? The project is not interoperable. It is totally incompatible with and disconnected from any other existing and future rail lines. And the exclusivity doesn't end with its tracks. Ticket prices will not be like the Metro. It will be for the business class. If the goal is to build connected rail systems accessible to all travelers to strengthen the national rail network, this project is not the answer. If it is built, the project will hit rural and minority communities along the proposed route like mine the hardest, including at the other end of the proposed route in South Dallas, where entire low-income and minority neighborhoods would be displaced because only one route was ever considered. The Department of Transportation recently halted expansion of I-10 and I-45 near downtown Houston due to similar concerns. In closing, I urge this Congress to invest our precious and limited tax dollars in infrastructure projects that would benefit all Americans. Have we not learned anything from the taxpayer-backed disaster in California? Texas Central promised its project was privately financed, and everything they've done to date, including the EIS, was based on that. So we say let it live or die in the free market. Invest our tax dollars in more equitable transportation solutions. We should not have to pay for another train to nowhere while having our communities destroyed by the very tax dollars that we work hard to contribute. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the people of Waller County.
Thank you, sir. We'll now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Crawford, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. I wanted to talk to County Judge Duhon and get some insight from you. Judge, if you would, can you talk about in some detail the ways that the proposed Texas high-speed rail project impacts landowners and the environment?
Sure. Thank you, Ranking Member Crawford, for the question. We have been trying to, for many years now, trying to have a very substantive conversation with the Federal Railroad Administration regarding a lot of the impacts that this project could have on our community in Waller County. The list, it's probably too long to really go into detail here, and I've got materials in my appendix. But for example, if this is built on a berm through Waller County, it's going to severely impact drainage and flooding in this area of the county. This part of the county has been impacted. We've had 4 FEMA floods in this part of the county in the last 4 or 5 years. Our emergency routes for our emergency response, our bus school routes, we've raised public safety issues. There's a natural gas compressor station that will be just a few hundred feet from this high-speed rail line that periodically releases gas into when the line becomes overpressurized. And that's just a few feet away from a high-speed rail line with an overhead electric line. And these are just a few of the examples where we have tried to sit down with the FRA numerous times to have these conversations and be treated as equal partners. And we have been refused at every step. And that's why we have a very serious issue with the process that's been used with Texas Central Railway. I would encourage anyone on any project going forward, please don't use the same process that's been used in Texas Central Railway, because our communities are being disregarded.
I was asking the judge if he thinks that there is sufficient demand to warrant this project, or would it be self-sustaining, or would it require government funding to support it?
There's no doubt in my mind this project will have to be subsidized. I mean, look, let's just be honest. There's very few high-speed rail lines in the world that run in the black, and the 2 that do are very heavily subsidized. And so, you know, we've had an environmental impact process that we've gone through for many years with public input, but it was all predicated on the fact that this line would be privately financed. I think the results of the EIS could have been drastically different if they had said this is going to use public money. But all that being the case, that's also why the FRA never looked at the feasibility of this project. And honestly, there's been several independent studies. The Reason Foundation, and this is detailed in my appendix, the Reason Foundation took a very hard look at the numbers, and they found that the ridership was substantially overstated. They're saying, you know, they're looking at getting 16,000 trips a day between Houston and Dallas. Right now, flights alone, just the flights are at, 2,000 and some change, and that's declining. So you would have to get everybody off an airplane to get on this train, and then you'd still have to get 13 to 14,000 people out of their cars onto a train. And I'm just going to tell you, in Texas, that's going to be impossible. So this project will never cash flow. The numbers don't work.
Well, Judge, I appreciate your insight, and Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Ms. Steele.
Thank you, Chairman Payne
All right.
and Ranking Member.
Yes.
I am here.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Thank you, all the witnesses today. The original price tag for California high-speed rail, I've been talking about California's high-speed rail, was supposed to be $33 billion. Over the past decade, price has exploded to more than $100 billion and keep going up with no deadline for completion. This project is unpopular in California, and Governor Newsom has stated that there simply isn't a path to get from Sacramento to San Diego, let alone from San Francisco to Los Angeles. As mentioned by Judge Trey Duhon, in this hearing, this is taxpayer-backed disaster with no expectations of it working today, tomorrow, or next year. The failed project has also replaced farms, small businesses, and houses with help-built train tracks, and has ruined rural and suburban communities. In 2019, the Department of Transportation stopped payment of $929 million to California and ended its agreement with the state for high-speed rail because of their continued failures on the project. When Secretary Buttigieg testified before this committee, and I raised these concerns, he said, "We have not had the type of resources or commitment that other countries have. $100 billion is a lot of resources. My constituents are already taxed enough with California state and local taxes, and skyrocketing gas prices making it unaffordable to live. I just came back from Texas. Their gas price was $2 something, and we are paying over $4 in California. We must preserve our local economy by lowering taxes, not raising them. And we must not continue throwing tax dollars into a high-speed money pit." As I stated this, Judge Duhon, like you, I have a question. I'm not opposed to high-speed rail. California's high-speed rail has failed, and the Texas high-speed rail project is supposed to be privately funded. I am concerned about taxpayer subsidies going to this project if it continues to follow California's track record for mass delays and cost overruns. What are some of the lessons we learned from both these projects? It is fair to compare Japan's successful high-speed rail system to this project we're talking about in the United States today. Since I've been riding these high-speed rail in Japan, I was raised in Japan. You know what? It's very reasonable price and you can go really fast. So I'm not really against it, same as you, but just give us those lessons that what we can do in the United States.
Thank you, Congresswoman, for that question. And you know, that's really gets to the heart of the matter. If we're going to do successful high-speed rail, we have to really look at the factors, the real factors that makes high-speed rail work. And what are those factors? There's been a lot of folks that simply take the position because you have a densely populated area in Houston and Dallas, that if we drop a high-speed rail line in between those two, that everybody all of a sudden is going to go to this high-speed rail line and ride it. And that's simply not true. There's so many things that go into what makes high-speed rail successful. I'll give you one example. The Reason Foundation has done studies where they have found that where you put in high-speed rail, where there was previously existing transit service, where you're replacing an older mode with a newer mode, and people are already used to using transit. And the example in Japan that you gave is a perfect example. A lot of people in Japan don't own their own vehicles. Their employers pay and subsidize for them to get on that high-speed rail. Between Houston and Dallas, you know, we have maybe 2,000, 3,000 flights a day that go between Houston and Dallas, and a lot of those are business travelers. So when you compare, it's just not apples to apples. And that's why this project, we've said from day one, would never cash flow. You know, where's the end terminus? For example, the station in Houston is still 9 miles away from downtown. So how do your business travelers get to the station rather than just go down to Houston Hobby Airport and fly to Love Field, which puts them 5 minutes from downtown Dallas? So these are all the kind of factors that go into. I can just tell you this. When you're looking at high-speed rail and you're looking at costs that have gone from 10 billion to 30 billion, and it really didn't cash flow at 10 billion, and then you have 30 billion, and you've got these very high projected ridership numbers, I just can tell you this. The folks in Waller County, the folks that I know, a family of 4 is not going to pay $1,000 to ride a train between Houston and Dallas when they can get there on a $50 tank of gas an hour and a half later. It's just not going to happen. So it's not a mass transit solution, at least not for this corridor. And I think we got to be real careful, because otherwise it will having a project like this fail will hurt projects where they should go, like on the Northeast corridor, where you already have people that are using transit, and we need better transit in those areas. But this project, for a lot of reasons, is just does not fit the mold for successful high-speed rail.
Thank you, Judge Duhon. I yield back.
Judge, let me ask you, many of the high-speed rail projects seem to favor the urban areas over the rural areas of America. And based on your experience, what do you think we can do at the federal level to make sure that taxpayer dollars are being wisely spent on projects that will benefit everybody? Is that even possible?
Thank you, Congressman. I really do appreciate that question, because that is the one thing that has struck me, having dealt with the proposed project between Houston and Dallas for several years now, and having interactions with the Federal Railroad Administration. We just ask that local communities be treated as equal partners. That is the biggest thing I can emphasize, to have meaningful and substantive conversations where we can talk about how this will impact our community, and how can we either work around that or work through it. The city of Waller, which is partly in Waller County, they have been working for decades to build the city center. It's really going to be a beautiful concept. The high-speed rail line just blows right through the middle of it and completely destroys it. We wanted to sit down and have some conversations. Maybe can the route be adjusted? Can they look at other routes other than the one that was pre-selected? And the FRA would really refuse to engage with us. And it was so disappointing. I was also president of the Waller County Subregional Planning Commission. This was a group we put together for the purpose of engaging in coordination with both federal and state agencies. We could not get anywhere with the FRA. We requested to coordinate with Texas Department of Transportation, because they are a state agency. They are also required to coordinate. And they met with us once, and we went through and told them all the impacts that this could have, and please give this to the FRA. Please make sure they are aware of these. And then when we tried to have a second meeting with them, they refused, and they refused because they were being instructed by the FRA not to meet with us. If you can believe that, they were instructed. That's what they said. We are being told not to meet with you.
What does the FRA stand for?
Federal Railroad Administration.
Okay. I was making sure it wasn't some Texas deal.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's all right. I'm from Tennessee. We know about TVA and
okay, I got you.
the IRS and the rest of those.
We had to sue TxDOT in state court. We won. We had to take it up on appeal. We still won. And then when they sat down with us and we said, okay, so tell us what's going on with this project, they said, we're no longer a co-lead agency and we're not in the loop anymore. So it was almost a concerted effort to keep us from engaging and having any input in the project. So please, any successful project has to have meaningful engagement with the local communities that you are going to substantially impact when you bring a project like this through the middle of their community. That's what we asked.
I appreciate you saying that. I think it goes back to what Mr. Washington had said about the template that you have in place. You have to get it up front. A good lawyer friend told me one time, good fences make good neighbors. And
Yes,
y'all didn't have the good fences.
I've seen 25 years. I can say that is absolutely true.
Right on.
Recognize Mr. Moulton for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to direct another question to the judge. I spent some time living in Dallas, and I'm very familiar with Texas, and appreciate all the uniqueness of that state. You stated that you don't believe, in your personal belief at least, that the Texas Central Railway will make an operating profit, that it will require continued subsidies after construction is complete. Does your highway system and airport system require continued subsidies?
I mean, Congressman, yeah, thank you for your question, first off. And of course, highways and airlines and airports, I'm sure receive, highways in Texas, of course, are primarily built by TxDOT and along with federal funds. So absolutely, there's no doubt about that.
We've actually transferred about $158 billion in general funds. So, not quite twice as much, but almost twice as much as we've invested in Amtrak in its entire history. into the highway trust fund. So not user fees, that's general funds transfers just since 2008. So actually there's a lot of operating subsidies that go in there. And that's not even talking about the operating subsidies that go to things like the highway patrol and emergency services. There's a lot of, there's a lot of support structure required to subsidize these highways as well. We did a study in Massachusetts that looked at the subsidies that taxpayers pay for our highway infrastructure here in Massachusetts. It was $60 billion a year, whether or not you own a car, because that's not in user fees. And I know that I-45 between Dallas and Houston is the second deadliest stretch of highway in the entire country. So you look at what they're planning to build there, it's pretty significant. Are you familiar with the plans to widen I-45 and make other highway improvements between Houston and Dallas, and how much those will cost?
Yes, Congressman, I am familiar with the projected cost of the expansions, and there is a cost to transportation. There's no doubt, and subsidies. I just would remind everyone that this project in Texas Central Railway was never predicated on public dollars. It was predicated on a privately financed system. So
Yeah,
I think
I understand that, Judge, and I agree that that is how the project was initially sold. It's interesting, you never hear a highway project being sold on private investment because frankly, the business community does not see a return on investment for highway projects, except in very rare circumstances with toll roads. And so it's actually a remarkable testament to the innate efficiency of high-speed rail that you can get a positive return on the investment. In infrastructure funds invest in high-speed rail systems all over the world for construction. But there are a number of high-speed rail systems that actually operate at a profit, whereas it's very hard to find highway systems that operate at a profit at all, even after the infrastructure is built. When you look at the system, that is not just the companies that travel over it. When Microsoft looked at the Cascadia corridor up in the Pacific Northwest, and we've heard testimony from Washington DOT there too. They determined that to build the high-speed rail line would cost half as much as expanding the highway by just one lane in either direction. And of course, if you just expand the highway, no one goes any faster. Lots of studies and experience have shown that congestion actually just increases over time. But even in a perfect scenario, driving in the middle of the night, you might go 80 miles an hour, which is a far cry from 250 miles per hour on ultra high speed rail in the Cascadia corridor. Because of that travel speed difference and the time difference, you also get all these additional benefits that you wouldn't get from expanding the highway because businesses, travelers, families are much closer. You can live in many more places and still work downtown than you could before. They've estimated about $350 billion in economic benefits if you build that high-speed rail system. And so just do the math. I mean, if you want to build high-speed rail for half the cost and you get $350 billion in additional benefits, that seems to make a lot of sense. But there's another thing that, and then by the way, these same estimates apply to California, where it looks like about twice as much money to expand highway and airport capacity. It also takes less space. Mr. Picari, last question, we just have a few seconds. How much do you have to expand highway lanes to accommodate the capacity of a single high-speed rail line? In other words, how many highway lanes does it take?
In the California example, Congressman, it's 6 lanes and 91 airport gates and 2 new runways.
Okay, so that's going to take a lot of space and
Yes,
a lot more farms and houses, as my colleague from California was mentioning, than building high-speed rail.
That's
Mr.
correct.
Chairman, I yield back. But I agree, and I think it's important to just point out in that regard that Judge, you were complaining about the process. They seem like very legitimate complaints you had with not being involved in the process. Of course, that was under the Trump administration that EIS was handled with the FRA. I think you'll find a different reception with the Biden administration.